I'd like to just spend half an hour, a little bit of nostalgia trip, just for 5 or 10 minutes, just to give a perspective of where Guildford came from and my experiences with Guildford, and then to go on to a couple of sort of sensible but crazy ideas about how we could collaborate more and do our stuff better. But before we start, I'd love to know who all you are. So could we just have a show of hands if you're involved in making a game? That's not providing a service, but just involved in making a game. Okay. And then the service providers to the games industry, and then the academics. Okay, so it's about half and 3/4. Okay. Well, let's start off. Now, can everyone hear me? Yes, good. Right, I'm going to start back in 1984. 1984, I had my first office in Bridge Street, and over PJ Hi-Fi. PJ Hi-Fi is still there. It's still very much the same as it was in 1984, to be honest. And the reason I came to Guildford, I'd love to tell you it was a strategic business region. I'd love to tell you it was because of the university, but no, it's because it was a free office, and it was a free room, actually over the top of this woman, this old age pensioner called Kath. Now Kath, unfortunately, sadly, had pretty much every single old person's ailment you could imagine. In fact, the screams from her piles being seen to by the local nurse, I captured and were in one of my games. She never knew. But you know, those are the Wild West days of the industry. We were incredibly tiny, and there was just me and someone called Glenn and someone called Gary, who was supposed to be here, but he's not. And we went on to and made this game. We didn't really know what we were doing. Everything was fine. The game came out. It was called Populous. It was a fantastic, amazing success. And then we realized we need a slightly better office than the room over Kath's. 2 reasons for that. One is, sadly, our office didn't have a toilet, but had a sink. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. And secondly, we had, after we released our game, we had this phone call from the president's PA of a company called Saito. Now, Saito was this massive Japanese multi-billion corporation, and he was coming over to the UK, and he wanted to personally come to our offices to talk to us. He came, his car drew up outside, he went in the little side door, up the stairs. Kath, who hadn't really seen anyone except us for like 10 years, saw him and started beating him out with a mop. This is the president of Saito. That's when I decided it was time to have a new office, and that's where I had my first office here in the technology centre, just down the road. It was a bit of a wake-up call for me, to be honest with you. In those days, the games industry was still very much, well, it wasn't an industry, let's be honest. It was a collection of bedroom coders who ate a lot of pizza, drunk incredible amounts of Coca-Cola, and coded all night. We weren't supposed to be proper businesses at all. So when we moved into the technology centre, I think we were very much regarded as the bad boys on the block. Maybe it was because we didn't wear any shoes. Maybe it was because we used to have BB gun fights in the corridor, and there's all these people doing proper business there. Anyway, we didn't think of ourselves as a business. Anyway, we carried on making these games. They carried on, incredibly luckily, being successful. We moved from the technology centre, and then we moved into an office. I think it was on Frederick Sanger Road. I can't remember, it doesn't matter. And we started growing a little bit bigger. And as we were doing that, so the games industry started to become bigger. It started to wake up and started to realize that it was more than just a hobbyist section. And I can remember vividly going along to my bank manager and saying, you know, this is before my success, is saying, look, I've got this business making computer games. And he honestly said to me, he said, my advice to you, go out of this office and get a proper job. That he actually said that gloriously, and of course, you know, I'd love to meet him again, but there you go. We as an industry were waking up to the fact that of two important things. Firstly, that we were just about to break through the $1 billion barrier as a global net worth of the computer games industry. The late 80s, early 90s was approaching $1 billion. And the second thing was we couldn't have BB gunfights anymore. Making games became a business. And when you're a business, you need talented people. And the fact that, you know, someone walked in for an interview was peppered with a hail of BB gun bullets wasn't really going to attract the highest quality staff. Anyway, we went on to make successful games, and then a number of companies approached us and said, we'd love to partner with you, which is the polite way of saying acquire. And indeed, we were acquired by Electronic Arts. That gave birth to far more professionalism in development, but it also did something else. And this was really the start of the Guildford Gaming Hub. It meant that a few people from Bullfrog, the early days of Bullfrog, started to consider splintering off and doing their own company. Now we had one early one of those was a company called Mucky Foot, and they had their offices in the centre of Guildford. They produced a number of successful games. Then quite a few others later on in the story, quite a few others like Media Molecule was started by a chap called Mark Healy and Alex Evans and Dave Smith. They then went on to be acquired by Sony. There was Barry Mead, who set up a games company called Fireproof, which has gone on to be one of the most successful apps on iOS. In other words, this flourishing industry started to bubble up around Guildford. And then that was amplified even more when Electronic Arts, after acquiring us, said, you know what, we might as well have our Studio Europe offices here. We've acquired Bullfrog, we might as well put our studio offices here. So suddenly there was this influx of people. I think it went, it went from, in my studio when I sold it, it was like 30 people, and within a year it was over 200 people. Then Microsoft joined the party, Sony acquired Media Molecule, Codemasters set up here. In fact, I would go so far as to say, at the moment, I've got no proof for this at all, at the moment, Guildford has the highest concentration of developers in Europe, which is pretty amazing and fantastic. But here's the bizarre thing. This is the bizarre thing. How do these people, you would think, looking from the outside in, that we would all be chatting and communicating and sharing our knowledge and experiences. No. In fact, I'll cite an example from this. This chap over here, Andy Robson, sent me an email a few weeks ago. Hey, Peter, do you want to meet up at E3 for a chat? I wanted you to talk about business. E3 is a show that's in Los Angeles over in America. The very fact that we had to go 5,000 miles to have a meeting, and in testimony to this, most of the times I meet the people in Guildford is either in America or in Europe. That's just crazy, absolutely crazy. And let me give you a few examples of things I have seen in other places which I found fascinating and inspiring, and I think there's a huge benefit to. I went to Berlin, and I was giving a talk in Berlin, and someone said to me, oh, we've got these garage. I can't remember the German translation for it, but basically it means garage party. And what it was is someone had hired a garage, a pretty big garage. Someone had hired a garage for developers to meet. Now these developers are not, they're not CEOs and COOs or PR people. These are coders. And they met, and they coded, and they worked on stuff, and they did it for the pure joy of doing it. Now, I know my staff would love, my coders at 22 Cans would love the opportunity to do something like that. They just need someone to take the momentum. And what I saw at this garage, this crazy garage full of pizza boxes and Coke cans, reminded me of the early 80 days, was really inspirational, because these coders were just messing around. They were coming together and coding for the pure joy of it. The polar opposite of that is San Francisco. Has anyone seen something, a television program called Silicon Valley? Yeah. Some of San Francisco is just like that. But what San Francisco does incredibly well is push people together. Now, normally it's around a social scene. Normally it's around something to do with funding. But very often it's more than just that. It's people coming together. But the key thing is, there's a similar thing with the garage thing and this mixer idea. The key thing is there's always a topic. There has to be a topic. Otherwise, you just end up talking about the weather. But I've been to a couple of those, and sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's hugely enlightening. When it's hugely enlightening is when people start sharing their experiences and sharing their problems. So, I'm going to propose a number of steps that we should take for us Guildford developers. Step 1. We should start a Google group called Guildford Developers. Is anyone here on the Google group called Game Insiders? No? All right, I'll tell you about it. There is a Google group which is invite only, called Game Insiders, and it is about 2,000 game developers of varying types, designers, programmers, CEOs, small companies, medium companies, large companies, all on this mail group, and it's curated by one person who's doing a fantastic job, and it is brilliant. The reason it's brilliant is one of the problems we all face in the games industry often is, should I go with that outsourcing company? Should I go with this outsourcing company? Should I what do we think about this piece of technology? Should I implement that piece of technology? The first thing I always do is ask Game Insiders. And has anyone dealt with Perl over in Singapore? Is anyone going to, my coder may say, oh, should we use, this protocol or that protocol? Has anyone used this protocol? And the response always comes back, and it's always insightful. I would say if we had one of those for Guildford, it would be incredibly useful. It costs nothing. We would need one person to volunteer to kind of shepherd it a little bit, but it's not really much work. One of those for Guildford would be fantastic. We also could use that to schedule, events like this. The second thing I'd like to suggest is that we use, one of the biggest challenges we have in development is assessing our own games, beta testing our own games. Very often we use some bizarre internal, when I was at Microsoft, we used the internal Microsoft groups. These people were over in all corners of the world. It was very, very open, a bit too open. why don't we do this? Why don't we simply have an invite list for people to play the games that we're working on? Now that's very easy for mobile, of course, reasonably easy for console and PC though. And why don't we all be honest with each other's games before they're released? Because I know my games would be a quantum times better if they had experienced eyes looking at them. And we're not competitors, really. I mean, Jesus, there's enough people in the world. We've got, 7 billion people in the world. Surely we don't have to worry about competition. So why I'm going to propose this. I'm going to propose that within the next 2 months, the game that I'm working on will use as a first sample of this beta list. It'll come out, people can play it, they can give feedback, it'll probably have loads of bugs, and we'll use that as a launch platform for us collaborating together. Interesting idea? Yeah. The last thing is a point of, the last thing I have is a point of pride. It's a little tiny thing, and it makes me feel proud, and it's already done an awful lot. And that is, when you make a game, when you release a game, whether it's a massive game from Microsoft, Lionhead, Electronic Arts, whatever, or whether you're a tiny little developer, just put a little logo in the bottom corner of the logo screen saying Made in Guildford. Why not? What I found, I've done that with my last app, and what I found was a couple of people who came for an interview said, oh yeah, I knew you were in Guildford because of this logo. And we need a sense of identity, and we need to realize the amazing fact that this location here has made games which millions and millions of people have enjoyed. And that has brought in billions and billions of dollars in retail. And we need to be proud of that. And we need to recognize that. And so my steps are simple. Let's get this Google Groups going. If it doesn't work, we haven't lost anything. Let's use ourselves to critique each other's work as honestly as we possibly can. And let's advertise what we're doing and make Guildford proud. That's really all I have to say on the matter. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.